student here, currently doing my PhD in international law at this university. Also one of the organizers of this symposium. It's such a pleasure to have you all with us today. Also, I'll be chairing our next session on strategies and alternatives for resistance. We will be joined by three distinguished speakers, Qaadaan, Sary, Zananiri, and Maicaela Sahar. So please, you can start taking your notes and question down as the Q&A session will follow after the speakers. Let's start welcome a Palestinian Australian who is specialist in dispute resolution. Qaadaan is a conflict resolution facilitator, lecturer, and trainer. His passion for peace with justice has led him to co-found the invaluable Palestinian Jewish Dialogue group. Ibrahim will be discussing resistance for peace with justice.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I just want to add one more thing to my profile. I'm still fighting Symposium because of my support for the BDS. I just can you hear me there? Or?
No, I can't hear you.
Okay. Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. I'll start my talk regarding the current situation and the factors that led us to where we are today and why nothing has happened for the past 67 years or longer. And we are still discussing the same conflict that our fathers and grandfathers been discussing for so long. And I think we've heard it from the about international law and how that may have helped us. But there are other issues that need to be considered before we really can go further in terms of making a difference to the conflict and the resolution of this conflict. A lot of people say the Middle East conflict is very complex. It's complex as much as we wanted to make it complex. It's not really complex. It's only the people there making it complex, but the issues that is not. The 67 years of Nakba, 47 years of the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, 22 years of negotiation after Oslo, and we're still here. Nothing has happened, no promises been delivered, nothing being fulfilled. I'll be discussing about the factors that we see. And I'll just start with the Chomsky quote. He said, for a century, the Zionist colonization of Palestine has proceeded primarily on the pragmatic principle of the quiet establishment of facts on the ground, which the world was to ultimately come to accept. It has been a highly successful policy. Every day we see new facts. Every day we go to the negotiation table, we find new demands, new conditions, new sort of things that need to be done by the Palestinians. And how much the Palestinians can give is never enough. It has been the case since the Zionist conference in Switzerland in 1997 to the current day of building settlements and the systematic evacuation of Palestinians from various parts of the West Bank and partly in Gaza as well. The politically diverse and conflict-ridden Arab world have failed to contribute to a just peace in the Middle East. As a matter of fact, the political divisions in the Arab world assisted Israel in carrying on with its settlement policies and in marginalizing the Palestinian issue for so long. And the PI is continuing the same thing that has been happening with Arab world, become an Arab regime itself, and there's no difference between them and the rest of the Arab world. The Israeli lobby are far superior to any other and have managed to enlist the support of many countries for Israeli goals. The Israeli lobby are well-resourced, well-financed, and have access to seats of power even in countries Israel has no diplomatic relationship with. This is evidenced by the December 2014 report in the Security Council, when Nigeria and others abstained because of their interest that they have with Israel. The Holocaust and the guilty feeling of Europe added to this stalemate and the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. The Israeli policies are aimed at frustrating any peaceful settlement in the conflict with the Palestinians. That includes an independent Palestinian state in any part of the West Bank and Gaza. Creating facts on the ground that are extremely difficult to ignore and prevent any viable Palestinian state. Creating division within the Palestinians, Gaza and the West Bank, Hamas and Fatah. Isolating the Palestinians and prevent any support from the Arab leadership. And building a relationship public and or secretly with the Arab leaders, which we have now. Following the agreement between the PA and Israel in November 2005, Dov Wiskwas, who was in charge of the negotiation and implementing the agreement, said in an interview for Haaretz, the significance of the agreement of the disengagement plan is the freezing of the peace process. And when you freeze that process, you prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. And you prevent the discussion on the refugees, the borders, Jerusalem. Effectively, this whole package called the Palestinian state, with all that it entails, has been removed indefinitely from our agenda. And all this with authority and permission from the USA and the owners. Sharon dismantling the Israeli settlement in Gaza and the withdrawal of the Israeli army from Gaza was not a humane gesture towards Palestine. It was a sinister plan that has been in the making for over 20 years. Israeli governments are committed to creating Palestinian enclaves in the occupied territories, separating Gaza from the West Bank, and that was part of this plan. Building settlements on hilltops and in between Palestinian villages and cities are not coincidental, but will go to plan to ensure that Palestinians will never have direct access within and outside the ground. And let's not forget the 600 checkpoints, roadblocks, and the separating wall that separate communities within the Palestinian territories. Netanyahu proved to be a more extreme student than the old guard. Netanyahu publicly said that there will be no Palestinian state under my watch. He said it because this is what Likud believes in since its establishment in 1973. The Charter says the Jordan River will be the permanent eastern border of the State of Israel. Jerusalem is the eternal united capital of the State of Israel and only of Israel. The government will gladly reject Palestinian proposal to divide Jerusalem, and the government of Israel gladly rejects the establishment of a Palestinian state west of the Jordan River. The current turmoil sweeping the Middle East with the invention of Daesh extremists alongside other extremists partly caused by the ongoing Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Billions have been wasted and nothing has happened. The Arab Peace Plan, which is sponsored by Saudi Arabia, calls for recognition of Israel by all the Arab countries in return for withdrawal of Israeli troops from the Palestinian occupied West Bank and Gaza. The majority of Arab and Muslim countries have formal or informal relationship with Israel, and without Israel accepting the Arab Peace Plan. Israel has full unconditional support from USA and Europe with or without peace with the Palestinians. Israel is forging a new and strengthening established relationship with African and Asian leaders. India and China are new allies of Israel. Russia also established stronger relationship with Israel. The question that needs to be asked, why would Israel give up occupied territories, establish the Palestinian state, and live happily ever after, since it has all it needs without giving up 1 inch of the occupied territories? The political leaders of our world no longer believe in freedoms, democracy, and human rights. So-called national interests override other interests and values. We cannot rely on our leadership to right wrongs. Our support for Israel is a prime example of interest-based policy. Following the recent Israeli elections, Sary the chief negotiator, said the Israeli elections showed the success of a campaign platform based on settlement, racism, apartheid, and the denial of the fundamental human rights of the Palestinian people. Such a result would not have been possible had the international community held Israel to account for its systematic violations of international law. Mitchell Blitnick, Program Director of the Foundation for Middle East Peace, said in response to Netanyahu's election winning, the only very thin hope is that the United States and Europe are finally so fed up with Netanyahu and the Israeli rights adamant refusal of peace that they are finally willing to exert significance on Russia. Although it seems likely that the US and Europe will do something, it is far less likely that they will do anywhere near enough for either the Israeli government to feel the pressure or for the Israeli populace to grow concerned enough to take action. This leads us to ask questions here. What else we could do to bring pressure on Israel? The only pressure we can do is left for us. All the international is important, but we all know what happened to the ruling regarding the wall. We had a ruling, the wall is still there, and is still being completed for the rest of the other parts of the West Bank, including the along the Jordan Valley. So it's really, what is it? The BDS is one example that we can put pressure on Israel. BDS is not really about bringing the Israeli economy down. It will never do it, but hopefully it will one day. And put pressure enough on Israel to start to think about its own interest and commercial interest. But really what BDS will be able to do is to generate this discussion. Why am I boycotting Israel? What is about Israel that I need to boycott? We need to start this discussion at the dinner table, at everywhere. This is what happened when we boycotted the South African regime. It did not, boycott itself did not bring down the economy of South Africa, but it did put pressure on South Africa and in our leadership to do something about it. And this is exactly what the BDS is all about. So it is in the absence of political will to pressure Israel into accepting two-state solution, and the alternative to ending 47 years of brutal Israeli military occupation is about BDS, which is a non-violent way to put pressure on the Israeli government. Israel will not end the occupation while enjoying the rewards from all directions, including from us. Israel has got away with murder for so long without paying the price. Israel will not stop if we continue to provide it with our support. It has approval, acceptance, and broadening of the Southern Policy if we don't take this sort of action. So the BDS is really about an action for peace rather than an action to punish Israel or anything else. It's really about similar to what we do with the ethical investment. We don't invest money in weapons and war machines and everything else. Why should we invest it in Israel? Thank you.
Thank you, Ibrahim. Now we'll be joined by a Palestinian Australian artist and academic, currently lecturing in the last workshop at Monash University, Sary Zananiri. Sary's artistic success has seen his work exhibited domestically and internationally. Currently, Sary is continuing his PhD in the Imaging of Jerusalem, and Sary's today's speech will focus on Palestinian cultural production in international art arenas.
Well, it's loading. Can everybody hear me without a microphone? Yeah?
This is the microphone.
Alright.
Before I start, I'd like to actually just acknowledge that we're on the Gadigal land of the Aurora people, and its land was never ceded, it's stolen, and I think that's a really important thing just to start off with saying at a symposium like this. My presentation is sort of grounded in art today, and without kind of opening up big art historical debates around about what constitutes art, I think it's, I'm sort of generally going to work with the definition that art effectively sort of is a reflection of the cultural context from which it came. In the case of the Palestinians, this is very much so, and it's very fair to say that the calamities that have befallen the Palestinians historically have been reflected in the multiplicity of art practices since the creation of Israel. In the post-48 period, we see artists like Ismail Shamuk here, who was working in the early 50s and onwards from there. He studied in Egypt, and you can sort of see the influences of that in the influence of socialist realism on his work. Clearly, there's this sort of sense of desperation around a work like this, but as sort of Palestinian art continues to develop over the years, we start to see quite different tropes developing. By the time we're sort of getting towards the 1967 war and the period following, we have people like Suleiman Mansour and Kamal Bulata, and they're basically starting to forge these new tropes of Palestinian imaging. These are often linked to a reinvigorated sense of Palestinian nationalism, and while they're sort of practiced concurrently, through the opposing styles that we see, we begin to sort of get a sense of the development of a plurality in Palestinian art as a result of the sort of population fragmentation that had happened. On the one hand, we've got people like Suleiman Mansour and his sort of investigations that are very much grounded in figurative art practice. And then on the other hand, we have Bulata, who's sort of much more vested in looking at sort of abstraction, Arab text, patterning, things like that. Despite the fissure of stylistic and art historical differences between them, their art practices are actually very much linked through their vestedness in propagating a Palestinian narrative and their refusal to have that narrative subsumed. This is particularly important in the context of people like Golda Meir, who in the late 60s and early 70s was sort of making spurious claims about the Palestinians not existing. So, in this period, the act of cultural practice became established as a form of political resistance in and of itself. And through that, there's a sort of a self-definition that it begins to provide the Palestinians. Interestingly, both artists engaged quite directly with the broader political realm in the production of posters that were disseminated quite widely. Again, the promulgation of these posters in the public realm, and very much outside of the confines of the gallery system, hints at the sort of the sense of hostility that Palestinian cultural practice, the hostility to cultural practice in the West and specifically within the global art market. It's in this period leading up to the First Intifada that we begin to see a privileging of the poster as a means of information dissemination. Practices such as the memorialisation of martyrs through posters became a codified means of maintaining anonymity while spreading news, as well as having their own intrinsic propagandistic value. And this is a practice that still continues to this day. Here's a poster of Rachel Corey from 2003. Similarly, the poster took on an importance in leftist solidarity struggles, as it did with other causes. For instance, the Organisation for the Solidarity of People of Asia, Africa and Latin America, OSPA, who were a Cuban-based organisation, and they produced numerous pro-Palestinian posters that were actually mailed out with their journals to an international subscriber base. So, in a sense, through OSPA, there was a global distribution system for these posters as a means of kind of disseminating that information. And this was something that they did well into the 1980s. It's interesting to note that in the early 80s, when Israel looted the PLO Research Centre and the Institute for Palestine Studies in Beirut, that the poster archives were actually amongst the swathes of cultural material that was stolen by them. Art up into the 1980s had been used effectively by Palestinians as a political tool, and shifts in the Israeli censorship legislation attested to this. This began in 1967 with the banning of the Palestinian flag in the recently conquered lands, and kept escalating until by 1980 there was a complete ban on using the combination of Palestinian colours in any artwork. So I think what this shows is that there really is an Israeli cognizance around the importance of Palestinian cultural practice in this period, and it really sets precedents for later actions, which I'll sort of return to. Sorry, lost my thread. Here we go. So by the late 80s and 90s, we see this new generation of Palestinian artists beginning to come to the fore. Often they were educated in the West and often raised as well. They were much more engaged with the currency of the contemporary art markets and contemporary art practice. So while still politicised, the production of their work fit much more neatly into precepts of contemporary art, eschewing the overtly propagandistic tendencies of earlier Palestinian practice in favour of sublimating political commentary. Artists like Maicaela effectively bridged the gap between Palestinian cultural practice and the West, especially initially working in sort of medium like video and performance, and later moving into more sort of spatial practices and sort of installation, things like that. She and others were quite actively engaged by the Western art market, piquing the interest of Western galleries and collectors. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, we started to see this shift partially as a result of her generation of artists, but also in combination with a series of other factors, for instance, geopolitical shifts in the region, things like the First Intifada, the First Gulf War, the Oslo Accords, and also in combination with a renewed investment in cultural infrastructure, the proliferation of biennales and things like that. And this is happening both in the Middle East and globally. So all of these sort of new iterations of Arab and specifically Palestinian art were suddenly becoming quite palatable to the Western appetite. The generation of artists that followed artists such as Emily Jass, Shalad Maki, Shabbat Sadek, Larissa Mansour, have become fixtures of the international art scene. Within the multiplicity of citizenship they collectively hold, the West Bank and Jerusalemite ID holders, Israeli, US and other Western citizenships. So we begin to see quite concretely that there's a fragmentation of the population that's sort of a result of the Nakba. But paradoxically, within this fragmentation, we also see the commonalities of their political aims within their work. So embedded within the heterogeneity of Palestinian art practice is still a core value of creating a narrative as cultural resistance. And this is very reflective of the urgency of the Palestinian situation. An example of particularly great work is Emily Jass's Where We Come From. This work basically utilises her freedom of movement as an American citizen to travel with minimal hindrance across historical Palestine. And it comes from it's a fairly old work now, it's 2001 to 2003 she was doing it, so it's a slightly different situation in those days. But essentially what she was doing was playing proxy to the fulfillment of wishes of Palestinians who don't have the same freedoms of movement, effectively utilising and mobilising her privilege as a Western passport holder. So some of the things she did were quite nostalgic, like lighting a candle in, Holy Sepulchre. Others might be much more concrete, like paying a bill, an electricity bill for somebody who's in the area city in Jerusalem. Likewise, Raqqa Sadek, and she was born in the 48 territories. She's an Israeli citizenship holder, and in this work she attempts to coax the land itself into speaking through the domestic act of cleaning it after its ethnic cleansing in the video of 2007 called Vacuum. These artists are just a fraction of the burgeoning Palestinian art scene that gives a sense of the multiplicity of ways in which contemporary art negotiates the re-narration of Palestinian histories and their contemporary outcomes. These artists have met with much success and shown internationally through various galleries and biennials. In 2007, Emily Jass won a highly prestigious Golden Lion at the Venice Biennale for her work Material for a Film, which dealt with the assassination of White House painter. The success of Palestinian artists in the international art arena has also met with much resistance. This is a work by Larissa Mansour, which basically collapses Palestine into one giant skyscraper with various cities on each level. Larissa's work, it's called A Nation Estate, was actually shortlisted for the Elysée Prize in 2011 at the Museum in Switzerland, and became the centre of a scandal when the prize sponsor Lacoste refused to allow her to participate within the event because her work was too political. This led to quite a debate amongst the art community and quite a scandal, as one can imagine. Oh, running out of time. Better hurry up. Essentially, eventually the museum backed her, and their relationship with Lacoste ended. 2009 was quite a watershed moment for Palestinian contemporary art in Venice Biennale. Emily Joseph's work Stazione was supposed to be part of what was going to be the Palestinian Pavilion. But the Palestinian Pavilion at the 11th hour, it was announced by the Biennale authority, would be downgraded to a collateral event because, according to Biennale bylaws, Palestine was not recognised as a country by the Italian government. So this actually led to, the pavilion still went ahead in a different form, but it was very much delegitimised. Coming on running out of time, I might skip forward a little bit. 5 minutes? 4 minutes? Alright. So an instance of alright, let's talk about the differences between the period between 67 and the early 80s and the contemporary sort of time. So a more recent and local version of this sort of polity thing is actually the work of Anglo-Australian artist Tom Nicholson. Tom Nicholson's project, Comparative Monument Palestine, propositionally wanted to take 9 war memorials in Melbourne, in Victoria, which bear the name Palestine, and transport them to the Yeshiva in the Middle East, as a means of looking at the sort of colonial processes both in Australia and in historical Palestine, as well as the interlinkages between them. Quite a sort of a controversy sort of erupted between Tom and the sort of the gallery structures as well as philanthropic funds, when, in a coordinated effort, both Santa Tarka, the president of the Zionist Council of Victoria, and Nina Bassat, president of the Jewish Communities Council of Victoria, sent letters to the NGV director, the chair of the trustees, and also then Minister of the Arts, Heidi Victoria. Given significant philanthropic funding made to the arts by families such as the Gandals, Calfors, Pratts and Myers, and their overlap with charitable work within the Jewish community sector, an uproar around Comparative Monument Palestine created a perceived threat to the NGV's future funding. In response, the NGV attempted to mediate between Nicholson and the Zionist Council and JCCB, who had demanded that the work be removed. It was suggested by the two groups that a right of reply be given to them and that a letter would be linked to the exhibition page on the NGV website. Nicholson agreed that if the full correspondence in its entirety between them was made public, he would agree to it, but the JCCB and the Zionist Council refused to agree and declined the NGV's offer, and the gallery ultimately stood by the artwork. In sharp contrast to Zionist attempts to delegitimate or censor Palestinian or pro-Palestinian artworks, the growing success of the BDS movement. An example of this is actually the Sao Paulo Biennale, which last year, where it was found at the 11th hour that there was quite considerable funding coming from the Israeli consulate. An artist-led campaign against this sprung up very swiftly, and within a day, over 61 artists, as well as the whole curatorial delegation, had signed the letter. As you can see, the commentary that they made were that sources of cultural funding have an increasingly dramatic impact on the supposedly independent curatorial and artistic narrative of a group. The funding, whether state or corporate or private, fundamentally shapes the way the public perceives work of artists and curators. Jumping forward a bit, I wanted to quickly, very quickly, discuss Palestinian curatorial strategy, because this is a particularly interesting thing, and it's quite different to the art practices that are coming out of the international art arena. Palestinian curatorial practice is often grounded in the fragmentation of Palestinian populations. This is actually a map from a geography of 50 villages by the Ruwaq Biennale. The Ruwaq Biennale, rather than kind of going to the big glam glitz kind of spectacular of the International Biennial, curates their biennial as a series of conversations that actually extend over a 2-year period. The idea behind this, as an organisation that's dedicated to the preservation of Palestinian architecture, is to effectively rehabilitate that architecture for community use and create new community uses out of these old spaces. They also collaborated with Al-Na'man and a whole series of other Palestinian art organisations on the creation of the Calamity International, which again deals with fragmentation in a very interesting way. In terms of Qaadaan, they actually curate across the various boundaries of the Middle East, of the historical Palestine, working in Jerusalem, the West Bank, the 48 territories in Gaza. So essentially, embedded within their sort of curatorial strategy is a sense of trying to actually create a grassroots network that doesn't really exist in a sort of post-Oslo context. You know, an arena where politics and politicians and PA have taken over. Another interesting body is the new Palestinian Museum that is currently being built in Gaza. Their programming is particularly interesting in that they're actually attempting to engage the diaspora as much as Palestinians within historical Palestine. Their first show that's shortly to be opening is called Never Part, and it flips curatorial models on its head. What Never Part does is actually invite Palestinians, no matter where they live, to actually suggest an object that has a story or that has an importance to them. So in a sense, what they're trying to do is create a snapshot of contemporary Palestinian narrative in a very popular sense through their programming. As part of their programming, they're also utilising digital forums and things like that, so a lot of their delivery will eventually be online in a mixture of Arabic, English and Spanish to engage communities as much as possible. So, while Palestinian artists have been garnering significantly more exposure in the international arena, Palestinian art organisations have been much more focused on producing these new networks and engaging Palestinians themselves. Embedded within these attempts to create new networks is a sense of value of such a heterogeneous culture, and also a focus on developing an inclusive Palestinian narrative. The importance of developing these new narratives is fundamental to the future of Palestine, and is actually quite a tenable model for thinking through questions of Palestinian citizenship through cultural connectedness at a point in history when the gleeful combination of fragmentation of population and the frailty of our political leadership have all but completely faltered our national aspirations. So where political and diplomatic efforts have failed, cultural practice has the potential to actually open up new means of viewing Palestinian society. And it also gives us an opportunity to construct new cultural contexts and realities.
Thank you.
Very interesting. And last but not least, we have Maicaela Sahar. Maicaela, she is an Australian Palestinian writer, researcher, and poet. And currently, she's completing her PhD at the University of Melbourne in the School of Political and Social Science. She is an occasional writer and commentator on current political and cultural issues surrounding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Maicaela will be exploring the transformative power of Israel's national narrative and the cultural endurance as a tool for liberation.
Well, I hope you'll all find my everyone's optimism doesn't include a great deal before we begin. So, Palestinian poet Mary Barghouti observed that at the Oslo Accords signing ceremony in 1993, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin stripped the Palestinians of everything, even the story of our deaths. Barghouti is referring here to the fundamental question of narrative and narrative dominance. He argues it is easy to blur the truth with a simple linguistic trick. Start your story from secondary. Yes, that is what Rabin did. He simply neglected to speak of what happened first. Start your story from secondary, and the world will be turned upside down. Trapped in this reductive binary, Palestinian narrative has been mostly obscured, and people mostly vilified, the portrayal of their history wildly misrepresented. In short, Palestinian narrative has been the elephant in the room, an ancillary to what repeatedly presents itself as the core to do in talking Israel, the question of its legitimacy. In consequence of this, I think the contemporary problem for Israel and the Palestinians centres on Israel's inability to recognise what effect they have wrought on the Palestinian population who have been exiled legally and rhetorically from the nation's history. In the current situation, in which Israel's anxiety of legitimacy must remain incurable, I think it no exaggeration to assert that above all is the endurance of Palestinian culture and identity which Israel has perceived as its greatest threat. In the 21st century, Israel has resorted with increasing frequency to abject destruction of Palestinian life and infrastructure, one of the series of state decisions which has led commentators, including US Secretary of State John Kerry, to declare the two-state solution dead. It is important to remember that this was by no means an inevitable outcome at the time in which Oslo was conceived. Throughout the 1990s, as Ilan Capet documents, significant intellectual labour was expended on the question of how to redress injustices visited on the Palestinian people by the Israeli past. Indeed, whatever its inadequacies, the Oslo process was a practical product of this era, representing at least an acknowledgement that there was something to address. However, in the face of Oslo's demise, I would advocate for alternatives rather than engaging in attempts to rehabilitate the model. Indeed, I believe that the end of the peace process represents a rare opportunity if it enables a new approach to narrative which can accommodate, where its predecessors have not, the fundamental issues of Palestinian claim, issues which have slipped from currency and off any kind of political agenda. International responses to the most recent Israeli strike on Gaza, Operation Protective Edge in 2014, indicates that narrative framing is at a crossroads for international perception of the Israel-Palestinian conflict. Military operations of the scale that have occurred in Gaza in the last 6 years have been instrumental in changing progressive public opinion. However, the current mode of practical and rhetorical response, precisely the attempt to revive a two-state solution for unilateral recognition of Palestinian statehood by Western liberal governments, in addition to the language of human rights and international law in public political spheres, should be considered as of intermediate value only. A far more valuable framework for the future than any political direction thus far engaged is, I believe, being produced by contemporary Palestinian cinema. At its best, the industry is creating narratives that attempt to dismantle and disrupt the logic of 20th century politicking on Israel-Palestine. At its best, it is re-engaging long-forgotten questions which, in doing so, rehabilitate core issues of the conflict and revive alternative ways of thinking about the future. For all the materials I have consumed about Palestine and Israel in the time I've been involved in this field, legal texts, historical texts, political, things focused on Western reactions or focused on the situation in the West Bank, of Gaza, or the interior, Salt of the Sea, a film by Anne-Marie Jasser, strikes me as one of the most essential texts I have yet come across. I'm not blessed with the sort of recall some people have, in which they can sing parts of songs and quote lines from films after a single exposure. And yet I was surprised to find that on rewatching the film in preparation for this paper, my memory of the sole other occasion on which I had seen the film at a festival in the year it was first screened was stunningly acute some 8 years later. And on my recent viewing, I recognised why this was the case. The film maps out with scintillating accuracy every single question I have ever confronted as a Palestinian of the diaspora about my personal history and the way in which that interior knowledge tessellates in the ethical and material facets of the question of Palestine. It takes all of these questions of justice and injustice and the anxieties of being a diaspora Palestinian, including the little documented tension of that identity with the Palestinians who have remained under occupation. And it enacts the scenes and unfolding circumstances in which pursuit of these questions in real time and space might result. Without recounting all of the conversations and situations in which the protagonist, an American-born Palestinian woman, finds herself, I think what makes her remarkable as a protagonist is that she refuses to play the particular game which diaspora Palestinians are encouraged to participate in. We are encouraged to participate in these games of concealment for our own good, and perhaps in a pragmatic and immediate sense, this is the case. We stand at the border and we deny our Palestinianness. We stand at the border and avow that we will not be going to Ramallah, for who would have any business there unless they were intending to trouble? When I was last at the border, I drew on my long-lapsed Catholic heritage, muttering the first verse of the Hail Mary over and over under my breath, finding I couldn't read the rest. I was seized in a wild panic, imagining that the Israeli border authorities would require such a recitation to corroborate my story that I was devout Christian pilgrim, en route to Jericho and Bethlehem. And when the latter part of the prayer burst from my lips at decibels well above the original mutter, I could not be certain whether it was a matter of my paranoia or a moment of significance when I was permitted, with relatively minor fuss, to proceed through the processing centre, and whether the authorities' observation of my performance of the Hail Mary had in any way ensured that. Sary makes no such representation when she arrives at Ben Gurion Airport. When asked, what is the nature of your visit, she replies flatly, it's a visit. For what Palestinians should have to compose some elaborate ruse to be permitted to enter their father's land? And yet, in our personal moments of cowardice, our desire to enter outweighing our bravery to accept the possibility of being refused, we accept the rules of the game. And in accepting these rules, by inventing our own minor fictions of purpose, in which we are never just visiting, much less returning, we are complicit in sustaining Israel's greatest fiction about the Palestinians and about itself. I believe this is where the power, but also the very present importance of Salt of the Sea derives. In every situation about which, in a moment of frustration, anger, or despondency, we Palestinians have had cause to fantasize, Sary articulates these desires. She insists on their absurdities. She affirms our history, and she invests in all of this a present meaning in relation to the Israeli state and Israeli occupation. For example, she arrives at a bank demanding to withdraw her grandfather's savings. She refuses the answer that the accounts were frozen or lost by the intervening fact of what is described as the war. It's the same bank, she vows. The bank is here. The bank is responsible. She is ushered into a meeting with the bank's regional manager, who finally dismisses her with the statement, "Take out a loan like normal people. There's really no need for stunts and dramatic stories." She seeks Palestinian papers with the authority to be told that despite her heritage, it is impossible. Why? She asks. Because the official replies, "Issuing you a passport was banned by our agreement with Israel." She confirms, "Your agreement decides if I am Palestinian." To which she replies, "Under the agreement, that is unfortunately the case." It is perhaps more predictable, certainly the most potent and widespread fantasy amongst the set, when Sary returns to her family home in Jaffa, and after cordial beginnings becomes incensed with the pacifist Jewish Israeli resident. Sary insists their host should acknowledge that the home is stolen, and that this, above all, should be admitted to, that this, above all, should be recognised. She is summarily ejected, which perhaps you find unsurprising, but perhaps too it is clear that in the situation of the Palestinians, claims are not always rights, that rights wield no tangible power, and that all of these encounters are very far from ordinary. What should be surprising is not that Sary goes beyond social nicety and is ejected or dismissed or patronised, but that she instigates these conversations at all, and that in instigating these conversations she has the weight of documentation, history and truth behind her, regardless of their outcomes. For some years I described this film in passing as the ultimate revenge fantasy, but on reflection, this is a hyperbolic way to think about it. In actuality, it's a film which at a certain level enacts a narrative wish fulfillment for Palestinians, and in particular diaspora Palestinians, who face continual and serial contestations to our identity, and whose practical right of return is at this time non-existent. The film presents the expression of our greatest desires, but it neither obtains a satisfactory acknowledgement of these claims from any external source, nor does it depict in some alternate reality what kind of miraculous future we could aspire to. But rather than thinking about the film as a fantastical expression of our desire, I think it raises precisely the essential question to the Israel-Palestinian conflict, which, in a very present sense, will need to be addressed by Israeli society as a prerequisite to finding a satisfactory resolution to the situation. It It raises all the dearly held narratives which the Israeli state has sought to erase with its colonial intervention in the landscape and powerful national narratives which have, for most of its existence, dominated not only the domestic conversation, but also Western discourse space and Western understanding of Israel-Palestinian relations. At the expense in the extreme, of Palestinian grievances and Palestinian aspirations. To return to the bank manager's statement, there's really no need for stunts and dramatic stories. I would suggest that, to the contrary, this is precisely the dramatic point. But the story of Palestine and the Palestinians is incredible in the sense that it is beyond belief and thus inherently dramatic. It is, to be sure, a very inconvenient drama for the contemporary reality of Israel. And it has consequently been suppressed and denied to such an extent that we are only unable to raise these basic questions in serious dialogue. Salt of this sea is a critical reminder that there will be no end to the present situation, neither justice for the Palestinians nor the quiet that Israeli holds indicatedly so Zion, without recognition and acknowledgement of its central questions. That is, the recognition of Palestinian political rights, historical claims, and past and present grievances represents the absolute minimum of what Israel will need to address for a meaningful process of reconciliation to occur. I think it says a great deal too about where Palestinian cultural production is at as compared with current political and diplomatic efforts, that the narratives being produced are addressing some of the most difficult questions of the conflict, which have for so long been ignored at the negotiating table or by the conversation at large. This leads me to a discussion of a second piece of cinema made in the wake of the first recent major Israeli assault on Gaza, Operation Qaadaan. The film Operation Qaadaan directly references Qaadaan in its satirical title. The 14-minute film details the intimate world of a couple and child held captive in their apartment by the operation, here depicted in the constant background noise of airplanes, tanks, sirens, missiles, and explosions, varying only in their proximity to the protagonists. The plot tracks the attempts of the couple to make love during the 22-day siege. The apartment setting is stylish and minimal, in which with little decor to mark it out as particularly Arab. Each attempt made by the couple throughout the film to have sex is frustrated by increased urgency in the external noise, often resulting in their child's teary reaction. For each thwarted encounter, the man inflates an unused condom. The final scene, 22 days later, shows the apartment floor littered with condom balloons, idling in the draft. The man makes his way out onto a balcony for a cigarette where he surveys a skyline filled with condom balloons that had emanated from all over the city. It's a short film. How much can you spoil? In condom-led... Sure. Okay. Look, in short, I just skip some points I need to make. Seems to have done a remarkably successful job of achieving its aims, which are about universalising the claim, making it non-particularised to Palestinian context, but as something that's relatable. And it sort of assumes the spectacle of death rather than trying to think through this kind of prism of love making as something that people really don't associate with narratives of Hamas or image of Gaza, I suppose. So the serious comments of the film is mediated by its novel premise, which eschews the trauma of the spectacle of death, captured in other documentation which followed Qaadaan. Each failed sexual attempt, marked by an inflated condom, is comically relatable for a Western audience, while the device of the condom succeeds in universalising the context of life on the siege. Second, it shadows the common betrayal of religious fanaticism in Gaza. But for all these reasons, condom-led marks a productive narrative direction for Palestinians post-Qaadaan. In contrast to the unique way in which much of Israeli national narrative is portrayed, including the exclusivity of their suffering, the film rather seeks to capture Western identification, to talk broadly, not narrowly, to appeal to universal values. Moreover, the treatment of Qaadaan depicts the situation with simplicity. It attributes no direct blame and is concerned with the effects of siege rather than vilifying its perpetrators. But siege is untenable, and that message is clear. These people, who happen to be Palestinian people, deserve, as anyone else, the right to enjoy their lives in unobstructed peace and with dignity. So, taken together, I think these two films provide a useful framework for where the conversation about the future of Israel-Palestinian relations should be held. Where Salt of the Sea revives the core issues of Palestinian rights and justice, Qaadaan presents a relatable narrative to a wide audience. There is no doubt that BDS, in its best form, has made inroads on the front of universalism, creating a banner around which people can endeavour towards Palestinian liberation. But it is not enough unless we can also re-engage a structurally sound understanding of what exactly it is we're working towards when we talk about solutions, resolutions, reconciliation, and above all, justice. So it is, I think, in the form of this high-quality cultural production, with its international accessibility and appeal, through which we should be insisting on shifting the terms of the conversation. When Richard Fawkes says we possess the moral imagination to know what a just solution will be, I think he's right. I don't dispute that enacting that imagination provides the serious challenge at hand, but I'm heartened by the visions of these Palestinian directors in showing us the way forward. For if one thing is certain, national liberation is necessarily an act of culture, and there is no doubt that Palestinian cultural production is a light.
Really interesting. Now we'll start our Q&A session. I would like kindly to remind you that we only have 15 minutes for this session. So to make this as effective as possible, we'll be taking 3 comments or questions at a time. I would like to ask kindly the participant to make their question as short as possible so we have the chance to get through. Question?
I don't know if any of you have done research, but I find that one of the biggest issues that Palestinians have trying to get their art out there is the lack of funding that is non-factionalized, that doesn't have a political price tag on it, and that deals specifically with the Palestinians. There are very few big organizations that do grant money for cultural reproduction, be it movies or otherwise. And I remember the director of Walmart talking about how he had people fundraising for it, and he went through business and contacts with non-factual audience. So if you can just talk about the lack of presence of Palestinian funding organizations that do not have a political price tag on it.
Other questions? Yes, please.
You spoke about film and you spoke about art and forms of activism. I was wondering if you can say about the role of music in Palestinian resistance. I remember when I was younger, the first father, my parents would always play quite nationalistic music, and that was very important at the time. But more recently, phenomena like Arab Idol and things like that have brought Palestinian culture to the Arab world and the world in general. So if you can speak a little bit about the role of music.
Yeah.
When you go to Gaza or the West Bank, the symbol that immediately confronts you is that of the key. But I noticed that none of the speakers referred to the key, and I wonder, is this a symbolism that is losing its force as the population ages, or and as the a right of return becomes potentially less achievable? Is that reflected, or is it just simply that the times have moved on and it no longer has the potency that it once had?
I have a question for Ibrahim actually, for your very interesting piece. As a resolution expert, how you see, like how you perceive the solution for the Palestinian Israeli issue? You think two-state solution or one-state solution is the thing, and why you think?
Yeah, just thinking through funding, I actually think funding is always going to come at a cost. There's always going to be some sort of vested interest, and it's pretty much impossible to get away from that. Even in a context like Australia with the Australian Council, there's still a government stake involved in that, even with how sort of regulations and arm's length funding. This was sort of something that about 10 years ago when the game Escape from War was funded by the Australian Council, had a massive impact on what happened to the Australian Council afterwards and how where it effectively disbanded both the new media board and the community cultural development board. So I actually think funding is a massive issue, particularly in a highly politicised context like Palestine. And I actually, I think community fundraising is really important. I know that one of the reasons that the sort of first Palestinian pavilion took so long to come together was because they refused to go through funding modes that would affect how that pavilion would be sort of portrayed. They wanted it not to be unpolitical, but for it not to be politicised, if that makes sense. So I think, yeah. And going back to the key, I think the key, yeah, to a sense, in a certain degree, yes, there is a bit of a fading around the key, but as a symbol. But I also think that's also to do with sort of generational shifts. And I actually think that there's a certain naivety in modernist Arab art, which, modernist art first off, not specifically, Arab production of modernist work. But I think in the 21st century is sort of being questioned a little bit more. I think contemporary art is slightly more sophisticated in its responses and in the way it kind of beckons you to think about something as opposed to just conveying a message in a fairly simplistic way.
So this is kind of step is ignoring music in our talks? Is that sort of
Ignoring, but how does music contribute to the other forms of art?
Sure. Well, perhaps something that's quite obvious, but something that really struck me about music is its transferability and the capacity to get it out in a way that's different perhaps from other cultural mediums, like through the radio and also with popular reality shows like Arab Idol. And it's also a very digestible sort of story. So I don't know if people noticed after Protective Edge, they found a grand piano in disrepair in Gaza. And so someone donated their skills basically to go and restring the piano, and then they had a nice little sort of art piece about the kids who couldn't play piano and hadn't had access to piano for sort of a long time. And I think the value of music in some ways, there's a number of layers to it. I think it's really important in communities as sort of, music businesses and about this sort of the oud and sort of cultural ambassadors through music, and that's very useful. But thinking about something like Arab Idol, which is sort of highly digestible, small chunks of stuff where there was, an Arabs Got Talent from the Palestinian group who'd been in Gaza, and it's very emotional, everyone's, very into it. Is actually the effect that has not on a Palestinian audience but on a non-Palestinian audience. So, the reception of my physical therapist, very proud of herself for having watched the 2-minute segment. There's something in telling me that Palestinian kids are also kids like everyone else. And at one level that's a really problematic sort of statement, but at another level it's useful if that's what it's doing for people. So, yeah.
I don't really have a background in music, but sort of speaking through the lens of art, I think there's something quite interesting about Qaadaan and Arab Idol and this sort of being Arab Idol. And I know Khaled Harani, who's a contemporary artist, West Bank-based contemporary artist. He made a comment that Palestinians don't have heroes outside of politics. We don't have footballers, we don't have sort of sports figures. We have, well, we do, but not in the. The cult of personality is vested very much in politics. And one of the artworks that he made was actually reproducing figurines for a show that he did in Scotland recently. And I think he sort of talks about it through the lens of this sort of new iconography. You know, how can we actually sort of rehabilitate Palestinian culture in a new way to actually sort of think about it outside. I mean, let's be honest, we're all pretty bitter about Palestinian politics. Like, political leadership is a bit of an oxymoron these days. So I think, you know, in a sense, you know, thinking about people like that kind of gives you a new way of kind of thinking about how you spawn a new generation and how they engage in terms of resistance.
We obviously haven't mentioned sort of Palestinian rap or anything like that, which is very excellent. But I think what the Palestinians haven't quite got yet, although they've been used for sort of a Maicaela, which is Lebanese sort of pop band, very sexy sort of group that just packs out thousands and thousands of people in auditoriums all over Europe. But they have a lot of very political lyrics, and there seems to be an appetite for that. And, you know, maybe rap hasn't been the right generation to do it in, but yeah, that would be amazing.
I actually tried to keep it, but I can't. You mentioned the piano in Gaza and the story in BBC. And when you started your talk, you were saying start from the second. And that's exactly what the BBC did with that story. Is they started with the second. The story began with the Oslo, with 92, with my father going back to Gaza and putting all his life savings into building a cultural center. And once the cultural center was built, and so was the theater, the Untitled Theater, we started getting, inviting dignitaries from different states, from different countries. And the Japanese embassy donated the grand piano to the cultural center. And what happened since then is Oslo fell apart. My father, under the siege conditions, was no longer allowed to cross into Gaza. And with time, and especially like the time cost that took place, the cultural center that he built with his life savings was bought. And people were not coming, and there were no bands coming. And there was, what he wanted was to have a place in Gaza for bands to practice, for bands to perform. And none of that happened. And so that is the background story to the piano. The piano didn't just happen to fall from the sky into a theater in Gaza that was in bad condition. This is the result of the politics that prevented many cultural workers under siege in Gaza and in the West Bank at times as well to actually reach their full potential. And I just had to say, I'm sorry for taking up some time.
They said in the news they didn't remember where the piano came from.
I actually tried to feed
Japanese
information, but the information was there, they chose not to put it in that piece. Anonymous.
So we'll move to the final question for Rahim. What do you think about the solution? One state to state or other solution?
Just a quick comment. About the key and the music and the culture. I think the Palestinians have been preoccupied with fighting for legitimacy and recognition, political recognition for the past few decades. And I think we paid little attention to the culture and other activities, arts and everything else that comes with it. The key is not only a symbol of routine, but again, it's a symbol of really ownership and legitimacy, more so than anything else. And that they are the sort of issues that now, in the last maybe 10, 15 years, we have come back to the culture and reviving Palestinian culture and music. In terms of the two-state versus one-state solution, the facts on the ground tell us all we dream and if we believe there will be two-state solution. We're much better off buying a loaner land and fund the two-state there than having it in between the river and the sea. So it is really one-state solution already in the ground. The only thing that is stopping it from being reality to everybody else is the PA. While the PA is there, they are actually enforcing the two-state that is high in the sky. The PA is acting as a government, as a state, and Israel is suited, suits Israel purposes for that. So really, we don't have it to stay, one state, it's only because of the PA.
You think Israel is fine with the request?
Israel is already dealing it with as one state with cantons here and there.
I'm talking about like one full state from the river to the sea,
No.
secular,
Israel will never accept Palestinians in Israel proper and Israel as equal states from the river to the sea. So the Palestinians, in restrictions and the evictions and the demolition and everything else is driving the Palestinians out. And I think we have seen a major exodus out of Bethlehem and other parts of Palestine, out of and Gaza is in prison. They are really have no way to escape or freedom.
I don't quite understand. You say that the two-state solution is impossible now because of Israeli policy. But does it mean that the one state is possible? So do you see why is the two-state? I don't understand why is the two-state solution impossible because the settlements are so big.
I think the effects of the ground is making it extremely impossible for any. I mean, the Palestinians have accepted big chunks of the settlements around Jerusalem and everywhere to be annexed to Israel and changes the land from Israel. But this is really is not going to happen because Israel will never give up their Jordan Valley, for instance. They will never give up their Dead Sea. They will never give up Jerusalem or any other parts of the big settlements, and they're still building settlements, expanding them. So
But what is the struggle for if not to force Israel to change?
Okay.
I mean, you prophesied about Israel never changing. So what's the
Absolutely.
what's the use of all these days?
The only thing,
So the
that's
thing is
probably-
whether the Palestinians, for example, if you say that two-state solution is impossible because of the size of the settlements, etc., then does it mean that you want to have a one-state solution with the settlements? Do you agree that the settlements remain? Because the whole rhetoric about the end of the two-state solution actually accepts the settlements as a final reality.
Okay. I think Israel does not want one-state solution.
No, but what about Palestinians? Yeah.
But the facts in the ground says there is one state already. Because the final state for anything happens between the river and the sea is in the hands of Israel, either the military or the government. The PA, once it resigns, Israel is faced with one reality. Either we accept the one state or we start really working towards two states because we don't want 3 million Palestinians amongst us in Israel. So they need to really then make a hard decision. What the current situation as is, Israel is not really bordered by the Palestinians in areas A because really they are contained.
I think if I may interject, where the Palestinian thinking is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we are left with two choices. One, accept the Bantustan state under the current circumstances, where we are the weaker party and we are not going through this structure that we've been asked to fit within, be able to get any more than a demilitarized Bantustan-like state with no access to our major resources, including water and so on. The second one is the one we're all battling with. I don't think anyone has 100% blueprint for it, but it's one where we're changing our thinking more to say, well, what is the reality? And the reality is we have been living in a one state since 1967, but we all have different legal papers that define our rights. So how do we fix that? And in that way, we cut through the PA negotiations, the complex system that was devised during Oslo, and we start talking directly to Israel and pressuring Israel to give us our rights. I think that's where we're at. It's not, that's what, sorry.
It's about really giving Israel direct responsibility for all the territories and then make up their mind, do we want them or we want to give them space?
dismantling the different administrations of the two populations who are already effectively living in one state. So I don't know, that's what I'm hoping.
Yeah.
Would that be true? Am I?
Look, I mean, I really, I mean, I think the one-state, two-state debate is kind of, is almost an irrelevance. I actually think, you know, the biggest thing facing Palestinians is keeping Palestinians on land in historical Palestine at this point in time. And I think that we spend a lot of time wasting our time discussing one-state versus two-state. But I think one of the things that we really should be doing is taking a leaf out of the book of Zionism. You know, they had a very multifaceted approach in terms of the colonisation of Palestine, as well as Australia and Uganda and Argentina and wherever else they were thinking about setting up colonies. And I think, you know, if we actually start kind of preparing groundwork for a multiplicity of scenarios, I think that's the most sensible thing to do.
Well, thank you very much. This is wrap up our discussion today about strategies and alternative for resistance. Please, let's have a round of applause for our wonderful speakers.